All right, we're going to look at some of the fallout from the end of World War One. I was going to do a slideshow with this, but apparently these files are too big for OBS Studio to handle. So we're going to just go with the last slide, which has everything on it. It won't be as intuitive, but hey, that's the best we got. So these are the territorial losses that Germany suffered at the end of World War One, and the rhetoric that Wilson and the victors had adopted at the end of the war was that war would end for all time, and that small nations would be set free. They would have self-determination. So this is what actually happened. What didn't happen was that small nations like the Circassians, the Kurds, the Armenians, the Ukraine, all of these different nations did not get self-determination. But what did happen was that the number two power in the world, Germany, was hacked up during the peace conference. So we'll start furthest to the west. We'll start on the western border. A tiny sliver of Germany, basically two towns and their surrounding areas, Eupen and Malmedy, those were transferred to Belgium. Down to the south, bordering France, the region of Alsace-Lothringen, or Alsace-Lorraine in French, that was transferred directly to France. Most of the people there were German speakers, and after the German victory in the Franco-Prussian War in 1870 and 1871, they voted in a referendum to join Germany. So that went back, of course, without consulting the people who lived there, who were German speakers, of course, for the most part. Directly north of that area, there's another circle, the Saarland. This was a big coal mining region. And the idea was that this coal would be used to help pay the war reparations. And that after 15 years of French or international administration, there would be a referendum to decide if those people wanted to join France or Germany. Now, in the orange, the areas surrounding the part that we've just talked about, this is called the Rhineland. So this is the area around the Rhine River, bordering France and the Benelux. This area was demilitarized, so it was going to be occupied by French and British troops, and the German army was not going to be allowed there, and there couldn't be any fortifications. So this was weakening the western border of Germany, so that if the French decided that they wanted to invade Germany, they could just march straight through there on their way to Berlin. Typically, you would fortify your border to discourage that kind of stuff, but this treaty was going to prevent Germany from doing that. If Germany broke that agreement, then the French would have a casus belli, and then they would be able to invade with some sort of legal, justification. In the far north, there's an area circled in orange. The area is named after the duchy and town of Schleswig. That area was put under international control, and later on 2 plebiscites were held there. The southern area decided to go with Germany, and the northern area decided to go with Denmark. But previously, all of that was controlled by Germany, so there were territorial losses there as well, although it wasn't finalized until the 1920s, rather than at the end of the war or at the determination of the Versailles Peace Treaty. Now we'll go to the southeastern corner, Czechoslovakia. Czechoslovakia is probably the most important. Czechoslovakia and Poland are the 2 most important outcomes of the Versailles Peace Treaty. They're important because both of them are designed to weaken Germany and to prevent Germany from becoming an international player like it was before the war. Hold on just a second, I'll be right back. Okay, so the idea is that Poland, which had not existed for over 100 years by this point, would be resuscitated to put a powerful nation state on the border with Germany that has had long-standing animosities. And to further weaken Germany, these areas of West Prussia, which is the area in the north right under Danzig, that area was given to Poland, although I think the Germans had a slim majority there. A lot of these areas that were given from Germany to this new state of Poland were, like 50% Polish and 50% German. So if you do believe in nation states, it's really hard to determine where they should go. If you believe in historical continuity, they should be with Germany. If you believe that people should occupy nation states, it's still a hard argument to give them to Poland, because in many of these places they were either slight German majorities, or still 50% or pretty close to that, so it's tough. But the people who were figuring out this territory for the Versailles Peace Treaty didn't care about any of that, so they gave West Prussia and Posen to Poland. Now, underneath West Prussia and Posen, there's an area called Silesia. It's centered on Breslau, or today Wroclaw, something like that, Wroclaw. This was divided into two areas, and the southern part, or the southeastern part, ended up in Polish hands. It's Polish Silesia. And then the other area, centered on Breslau, ended up back in German hands. So all of these areas that were ceded to Poland, there was a lot of talk about plebiscites that would be held in order to award these territories to whichever country. But generally, the goal of the Allied states in the Versailles Peace Treaty was to get as much of this territory into the hands of Poland to strengthen that country and weaken Germany. Now, in 1919 and 1920, there were what they call the Silesian uprisings, and these were attempts to either break these areas off and attach them to Poland by force, or they were red communist Bolshevik uprisings. And I've kind of read both things about that, so I don't really know what to believe. But at any rate, self-organized German World War I veterans formed militias, basically, and put down those uprisings, and that's what kept Breslau in Germany. Now, for Czechoslovakia, it's a really strange country, and later on you would have a lot of people who would complain about it for numerous reasons. There were, I guess we'll say, 4 or 5 ethnicities living in this area. The most numerous were Czechs, and they're the Bohemians of previous German history. Now, to the east, on the other side of the Carpathians, there is a related ethnic group that call themselves Slovaks. Now, they're both Slavs, and I believe that the Czech language and the Slovak language are more or less mutually intelligible. And so Czech nationalists, or people who were running the Czech political establishment in the pre-war and interwar period, denied the existence of a Slovak ethnic identity. They said, you guys are just Czechs, so shut up. You don't get any special rights and privileges. You're going to be ruled by the Czech majority that's in Prague, rather than having local self-determination. So those are the first 2 most numerous ethnic groups, or together they're the most numerous. The Czechs are the most numerous overall. The other major ethnic group are the Sudeten Germans. So this area that's outlined in red, that's a C shape or a horseshoe shape that goes around the border of Czechoslovakia with Germany, that area was overwhelmingly populated with native German speakers, German ethnic people. So why was this territory given to Czechoslovakia? It was given to them because, again, to weaken Germany, and also because it's strategically important. I think that area is mountainous and hilly, and if you want to be able to defend yourself from Germany, you need the mountains and hills. It wouldn't do any good for Czechoslovakia as a state If it existed only in the lowlands and there were mountains and hills around it, that would, you can put artillery on and fire down into it or invade. So this was a strategic consideration, and like we said, just to weaken Germany. Now, there were also Poles, Romanians, and Hungarians in Czechoslovakia. So you have a pan-ethnic state. It's got 5 or 6 ethnic groups in it. I think the amount of non-Czechs in the state was something like 49%. So you have one ethnic group, the Czechs, whose leaders are ruling a state that is 50% minorities. It's pretty amazing. That doesn't really fit in, does it, with the idea of ethnic and national self-determination, which was supposedly one of the organizing principles in this post-war period. What else have we got? We've got Danzig up there on the Baltic Sea, which is a German port city. The population was almost completely German. That was set up as an international free state, so it's not owned by Poland or Germany. It's has some sort of special status set apart by itself. And then also Memel, or the Memel, which was another much smaller port city in Lithuania, in what's today Lithuania. So these were German territorial losses, and this created a situation in which there may have been 10 million ethnic Germans living in foreign states. So this was a time bomb that had to go off, absolutely had to. And the reason why the people who were putting together the Versailles Peace Treaty were so intent on doing this is because a unified Germany was the most powerful state on the European continent and posed too much of a threat to the victors. I didn't mark it on here, but I think also, well, let's talk about Austro-Hungary. So Austro-Hungary was a monarchy centered in Vienna. They sometimes call it the dual monarchy because there's a king of Austria and a king of Hungary, and the same man holds both positions at the same time, Habsburg monarch. Austro-Hungary was a weak state because it was so multi-ethnic. I think the German population of it before the war might have been 35 or 40%, something like that. So just like Czechoslovakia would be, it was a state where one ethnic group was ruling many other ethnic groups, including Croats, Slovenes, the Hungarians. And so Austria constantly, to hold itself together, had to delegate local autonomy to all these different ethnic groups, which kind of crippled it as a state. At the end of World War I, the Versailles Peace Treaty broke the Austro-Hungarian Empire up into all these different countries. So Austria was strengthened because the Austro-Hungarian state was eliminated from existence. The new Austria that was created was relatively strengthened because it was now ethnically homogenous. That being said, they couldn't get their act together, and the obvious next step would be to incorporate this new 100% German state into Germany. This was expressly forbidden by the Versailles Peace Treaty, and various powers in Europe set themselves up behind Austria to protect it from Germany so that this would not occur. So when eventually in 1938 there was a reunification between Germany and Austria, the only people who were against it were foreigners and the political establishment in Austria, who had in fact mismanaged the country economically and politically and not held elections in Austria for 6 years by that point. It was a one-party state. The socialists, the communists, and the National Socialists were banned parties. So it was an incompetent one-party state and sort of a political dictatorship with one guy running it. So Austria was a complete mess, and that's why the reunification, or the joining, the Anschluss between Germany and Austria was so well received amongst normal people. So what else have we got to talk about here? The geopolitical implications of this, I think Czechoslovakia is the most important one. There was a triple alliance between France, Czechoslovakia, and the Soviet Union that many people don't know about, especially in 1935 and 1936. These three countries, and sometimes just two of them, so it's like France and Czechoslovakia concluded a pact, Czechoslovakia concluded another one with the USSR, and France and the USSR concluded a bilateral pact themselves in 1935, I think. People don't know about that, and it's just kind of interesting, right? Why would the multi-ethnic democratic republic of Czechoslovakia ally with the totalitarian Bolshevik Soviet Union? Well, it's just geopolitics. Why would France do the same thing? It's just geopolitics. So, what else do we need to say about that? I'll be right back. So, just to say a couple more words about the overall process that was going on here in the 1930s. The Anglo world characterized the German political activity in the 1930s as aggression, revisionism, barbarism, and the German attempt for world domination. Most of it seems to be trying to deal with this situation, either to one, get back these territories that were lost that contain millions of ethnic Germans, or two, to deal with the threat of Czechoslovakia, which was described as an aircraft carrier in the heart of Europe. So at one point, the Soviets were flying planes into Czechoslovakia and stationing them at Czech airports. To protect the Czechs from Germany, for instance. So this is what the foreign policy of the 1930s is this struggle for Germany to regain these territories that it's lost and set itself up to protect itself. Now, what actually happened was that Germany ended up, I think, being stronger than it was in World War I. Mostly because it gobbled up Austria and got back several of these territories. So once Germany becomes as strong or stronger compared to World War I, the Allied powers, France, Britain, and the Soviet Union, now are back in the same situation that everybody was in World War I, before World War I. And they make the decision, in my opinion, to there's a war party in Britain, and they start to figure out how we're going to go to war. How are we going to get another war to knock Germany back down to size again? And it ends up being Poland. And as I said, I think in the first video in this series, there were some Polish Freemasons who end up, trying basically as the sacrifice to start World War II. You'll notice that France and Britain declared war on Germany, but then didn't do anything about the invasion of Poland. It's because the Polish issue was an excuse. It was a way to generate a casus belli to start a war on Germany, and have a way to blame them for what happened. If you look at Pilsudski, who maybe you agree with Pilsudski on some things and not others, he was the military dictator of Poland in the 1920s and early 1930s. He actually had good relations with the National Socialists and Adolf Hitler. He was a nationalist, and he thought that the big threat was the USSR and not Germany. So he wanted to conclude a non-aggression pact with Germany, and they did that. Things changed, I think, in 1936 and 1937. The Poles became pro-British and pro-French, and that's when everything started going downhill. That's when the ethnic cleansing on some scale that we really will probably never know how many Germans were being killed by Poles in these border regions and in Posen and West Prussia. But the German public certainly thought that it was a big deal. They would be seeing refugees and they would be hearing on the radio. How much was propaganda and how much was really happening, we don't know. The same issue was going on in the Sudetenland, where in some cases Czechs were ethnically cleansing or, killing or driving out Germans, ethnic Germans from that area. So this is just fuel that's added to the fire. And Beneš, who was the guy who was basically running Czechoslovakia at that time, was also extremely close to both the Soviet Union and Britain. So all of this stuff just falls into, it seems to me like really easily understandable and even predictable to a large extent. The geopolitical concerns, the post-World War I period, and the same kind of issues that led to World War I in the first place. So I think we'll stop here. I'm going to be leaving town pretty soon for about a week, so you're not going to see anything from me for a while. But when I get back, hopefully we'll have some more to talk about. Thank you.